I lined all those up in the calculator. I had a term limit on the $500 one. The car loan thing, like I could probably knock out if I just paid extra on it. So I knocked that one out first, and it took me like 3 months because I was making $700 on my house in Portland. So taking that extra money, add that to the $250 that I was paying, I'm now paying about $1,000, right? So once I knocked that out, I added like that $250 to my HELOC payments, and I added the $700 to my HELOC payments, and I just started doing that. So when the $500 thing ran out, started throwing that at the HELOC payments. So by the end of December of 2022, I had knocked out that $70,000 debt, and I have no debt now, like other than my mortgages.
What does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit in that? We tackle those questions and others in the School of Financial Freedom podcast. We talk about the role of money in our personal growth and spiritual liberation, the concrete math of budgeting and saving and investing, and how all this relates to the life you were meant to lead. Each episode is an interview with a former student of my online course, Financial Freedom 1, where they explain their favorite lesson and years later, what financial, behavioral, and spiritual impact it had on them. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of School of Financial Freedom, and your host. Glad you're here. So I'm excited for everyone to meet Cedric today. It's an interesting story about meeting Cedric. I actually worked with Cedric in my last job before I hit financial freedom. I have very distinct memories of him. He used to come into work in custom suits every single day, and they were like unique, beautiful suits. It's like, a dream of the 1890s alive in Portland type of suits. And he'd come in with this gorgeous antique bike, and Cedric, was the head of a Cure cover band. He painted his, fingernails black. He was just an imposing presence. And it's interesting to, Cedric within that lens before I knew him as a financial freedom student, because we're going to be talking about debt today. Sort of knowing Cedric before understanding his financial story was really interesting. So welcome, Cedric. It's good to have you.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You want to tell the audience just a little bit about yourself before we get into your larger story?
Sure. That's always a tough question, but I like to call myself an ever-evolving human being trying to make a life that works for me. I currently kind of sort of live in three places. Portland is where I work. Buffalo is where I own a business, and I live in Spain as a resident currently. I am a humanitarian. I like to call myself an economic democrat rather than an economic monarch. That's my vision for the future. And I took financial freedom in 2019 after being unemployed for a while and working for this really extractive sort of consulting company. So I was ready to kind of learn a new way and change my life. And it turned out that it worked.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because when you took financial freedom in 2019, both Buffalo and Spain had not happened. I think Financial Freedom 1 actually sprouted the ideas of both, Buffalo first, and then later on Spain. So we'll get into that story. But first of all, wait, economic democrat versus economic monarch? You got to explain that.
Okay. Well, we have lost our path for what I think of as a way forward in our sort of capitalism thinking. We can't use the word socialism. We can't use the word communism. Politically, we like to think of ourselves as Democrats, right? Where everyone has a say and everyone has a purpose. But then we work these lives where it's very top down. There is definitely a king marching orders to the lords, and the peasants. And so, yeah, I would like to see that particular part of our lives change and be a driver for positive social change. And it is technically Marxist to think of the worker unit as a democratic entity. But Marxism is kind of off limits, right? You're not allowed to say you're a Marxist anymore.
You're going to have some declaration of independence and an Independence Day then.
I don't know. I think it could be done really at the community level. I think we could build, like B corporations are a different way of looking at companies. We could have worker-owned cooperatives and worker-owned companies. And in fact, a lot of the tech companies, that's how they attract their talent, is by sharing the wealth with everyone who works for them. And I think it's a really good model. And the tech companies are the ones sort of ushering the changes in this post-capitalism that we, this late stage capitalism that we have. So we should learn from them, and everyone should start to share the wealth with their employees. I mean, stock options are a good idea. It's a way for us to all take part in the successes of the organizations that we work in.
Profit sharing.
Profit sharing. Word. I mean, it's not a foreign concept, right? So we just need to up the game on that so that everyone has a piece of it.
All right. Well, let's expand your story a little bit. You took Financial Freedom 1 in 2019, and you moved to Buffalo there shortly thereafter. Let's start there.
Sure. So my moves to Buffalo, my move to Spain are all part of dreams that I had. So I'm really kind of an opportunist in a lot of ways. And when I see an opportunity to do something that helps me realize my dreams, I like to take advantage of it. So in 2017, I was unemployed in a sort of, my long-term relationship had ended, and then I met someone new. She was from Buffalo. I visited Buffalo, and Buffalo felt very much like the Portland, Oregon that I moved to in 1995. It was gritty. There was, the restaurants were closed on Sunday. Like, the food isn't super great here. And it was cheap. And the weather sucks, according to, the lore. So I really liked that people in Buffalo are always looking forward rather than looking backward. And that was something that I started to struggle with in Portland, is that Portlanders were always looking backward at old Portland or times that were better. And Buffalo doesn't remember a time that was better, right? 50 years ago, Buffalo sucked. 40 years ago, Buffalo sucked. Now, 120 years ago, Buffalo was awesome, right? And there's lingering architecture and money for art that's here that informs that. And I really I fell for that sort of energy. And since it's one of the last sort of livable sustainability oases, I decided to make the leap. So moved here, bought a building for $400,000 that has 2 apartments in it. So I'm sitting in one right now. It's 1,300 square feet. I have another apartment downstairs, same deal. They're 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartments built in 1920. And then there's a bar in front. And since I was 21, 23, something like that, I always wanted to have a bar. So I own a bar now. And buying the building made that possible, and starting up the business during COVID actually was an oddly good move for us.
Wait, so you have a mortgage, presumably low mortgage because you got it in what year?
I got it in 2020.
Yeah. So you got a low mortgage, presumably.
Yes,
To rent a unit and produce income from the bar.
correct.
Holy moly. So, like, does the building pay for itself?
That's the goal. So the company is in its third year. The Mary Shelley is the name of the bar. Anyone can look it up. Merry. We wanted to be fun with it. We're a gothic horror literary bar.
Wait, slow down. A what?
A gothic horror literary bar.
You have a website to tell people?
Yeah, theMaryShelley.com.
And it's Merry Shelley.
Yeah, and Shelley is EY, as in, Mary Shelley. And
so, what is a gothic? What?
Gothic horror literary bar. Technically, a romantic gothic horror. So Mary Shelley started the horror genre, essentially, and she was a feminist, which we're very, very okay with. In fact, that's inspiration for us and the aesthetic of the bar. In the 1820s, she was married to Percy Shelley, who was, a romantic poet. You got Bram Stoker, who kind of, followed on with this horror genre. And so she invented like what would be modern day horror. And I don't know. I love the book Frankenstein. I've always been the tallest kid in class, so dressing up in Frankenstein was very easy for me. I don't know. It's just it's a really inspirational life that we pay homage to in a way. Yeah. So that's where the gothic horror literary thing is. So we're Buffalo is an interesting place because it's very homogeneous in a lot of ways. So in Portland, when you go to a bar, like every bar kind of has a different theme or a different take. In Buffalo, every bar is a sports bar in Portland. There are 1,000 TVs. They serve the same food. It's the Western New York diet is pizza, subs, wings, and they drink Labatt Blue. You're Canadian, you probably know what that is. To the extent that they have a Labatt brewery in Buffalo, like an outpost, so that they don't have to pay import duties. It's crazy. And Buffalo is an interesting place too because it's in New York, but it's in Western New York, so it's a Great Lakes. It's like the gateway to the Great Lakes, but it's on the border with Canada. I mean, I can. Canada's a mile from here. I can cross the bridge and
in your window.
Yeah, I can really see it. Like it's pretty cool. So just across the Niagara River is Fort Erie. Buffalo and Niagara Falls or Niagara Falls in a different county, but Buffalo's in Erie County. So and we're on Lake Erie, and there's this Erie thing. So anyway, where were we?
Okay, so you moved to Buffalo. Explain the move to Buffalo in terms of the debt story.
Okay, the move to Buffalo was probably the best financial decision I've ever made. So. By moving to Buffalo, I lowered my monthly expenses and I was able to capitalize on renting out my house in Portland for a profit. So by renting out my house for a profit, that got the debt snowball concept in motion. So when I moved, I had a home equity line of credit. It was at about $70,000. So that's the end of 2019. I also had I had a couple of other things that were dragging me down, and I used you had given us some resources on Debt Snowball, which were fairly simple, right? And you have a few of the different tactics of knocking out the highest interest stuff first, knocking out the lowest payment first. Like there are a few different tactics. Mathematically, some things are better than others, but psychologically is the important part for me. So what I did is I figured out how much I owed, and I'm trying to figure these things out in my head. But I think I had like $250 car loan, and I had a $500, for lack of better terms, alimony payment, and then I was paying on this HELOC as well. Um, Credit card debt has never really been a super big thing for me. I tend to just pay those off as I go. So I don't remember having any significant credit card debt. Um, and then I got, a couple mortgages. And so I lined all those up in the calculator. I had a term limit on the $500 one. The car loan thing, like I could probably knock out if I just paid extra on it. So I knocked that one out first. And it took me like 3 months because I was making $700 on my house in Portland. So taking that extra money, add that to the $250 that I was paying, I'm now paying about $1,000, right? So once I knocked that out, I added like that $250 to my HELOC payments, and I added the $700 to my HELOC payments, and I just started doing that. So when the $500 thing ran out, started throwing that at the HELOC payments. So by the end of December of 2022, I had knocked out that $70,000 debt. And I have no debt now, like other than my mortgages. So my next goal, and this is where I think I hit the balance point, is to pay off the house in Portland. Because by living in Spain, my cost of living is what I make in rent in Portland. So that's my passive income stream, but it also completely funds my lifestyle there, which is crazy, right?
It's crazy because this whole debt snowball slash debt avalanche thing that you've done. Do you remember which one you did between those terms?
I don't. I think it was the snowball. I'm
Yeah,
not sure what the avalanche is.
I think the snowball is the one where you knock out uh, the smallest debt first, and the avalanche is the one where you pay the highest interest debt first. And the avalanche makes more sense mathematically, and the snowball one is psychologically more. Um,
I think I did the snowball then. Yeah.
yeah,
I think that makes sense because here's an example. And this is something I'm considering. My mom paid off my student loan debt, right? And so that's been a 0% loan, but I'm still struggling psychologically with just paying that. And I'm still considering having a conversation with my mom. I'm like, can I just pay you the rest of this and just be done with it, right? It doesn't actually bother me financially, right? It's not that much money. She gave me a small loan to help buy the equipment here at the bar. I included that, but just having multiple different streams coming out is it's complex. And I think what I like about the debt snowball is it simplifies things.
it's huge, and like debt is a psychological burden, which is the whole point of the lesson that we're doing, which is 3.9.
Yes.
Like, actually, I think you know this. The house I live in, I bought cash, and in theory, I could have gotten a mortgage, but I was burned already from a previous mortgage that I had to foreclose on a house um, during the 2009 housing crash. I just refused to take another mortgage. I think financially, it would have been a lot smarter for me to get a mortgage, but there was no way I was going back into debt again. And so I didn't.
Yeah.
with the help of a family, and then paying the family back was a smaller psychological burden.
It is smaller. It is smaller because they're willing to, I don't know, understand your situation. It's not
And
just a math.
also, like, you're paying someone that you know, which it, like, as opposed to an impersonal, financial institution, which quite I don't. Oh wait, this is my podcast. I'm allowed to swear. Like, who's willing to fuck you when something goes wrong, right?
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
feeling like paying interest to a family member feels a lot better than paying interest to
It absolutely does.
um, an institution. But also, not paying anyone anything feels a lot better.
Of course.
It's
Right.
total sense of security living at my house without a mortgage.
Yeah. This is bringing up one thing for me that I had always considered or planned to do, but never actually did. And I just wanted to bring it up because it seems relevant to what we're talking about. Um, Way back when I had like this life insurance policy, which was kind of a retirement account, something, something. But one of the selling points was that I could borrow against it and pay myself back with interest. I think there are instruments for retirement where you can do that. Um, and so if we want to talk psychological, paying yourself back with interest or paying your future self back with interest is is a really good thing to look into. And so, if you have the ability, I can see that fitting into the psychological thing.
Yeah, but you still have to borrow from your future self,
Yes, yes. But
which
it feels really good to overpay your future self when you and get into the habit of paying into that.
but if you never got into debt with your future self, you could just send money to your future self anyway.
Of course, of
Yeah.
course. And it
Well,
depends on where you are in the cycle, right? So,
well,
you
you
know,
bring up one of the two major points in the lesson, which is when you take on debt, your present self is asking your future self to pay for present consumption.
absolutely.
And the whole point of financial freedom is that you're actually trying to do the reverse, which is sock money away. You're trying to get your present self to pay for everything that your future self will spend.
Yes,
And debt is exactly the opposite.
exactly. And it's interesting because, you were talking about the different, interest rates, 2020, like, they're offering me 3%. 3% sounds really low, but when you look at how much you actually have to pay back, it's not low. And the way that the banks, as you've mentioned, the way that the banks fuck you is by,
Hey, this is my podcast. You're not allowed to swear.
oh, I'm sorry, is by sort of presenting the seemingly low number and then front loading the interest so that you are spending more time digging out at the beginning than at the end. And so that they get their money up front. And I don't know of any other situation where they're able to sort of amortize the debt, calculate it out over a term, and then front load it. Like that doesn't make sense to most of us, but that's a total trap that they do. And even at a 3% over 30 years, you're still paying like more than double for the asset that you have. And so what you did by not getting involved with the mortgage thing, is that too, right? So if you're paying your family back and you're paying them double for your asset, great. Let's go.
Yeah, the other major point, which I would love for you to speak to, is in the lesson. Actually, it comes from Sterling Roth, who was a former student. His quote is, "Any debt-based financial transaction, poor person giving rich person money. It's a powerful
Oh,
driver of inequality, and I don't want to participate in it."
I wholly agree with that. And part of my experience in going to Spain has really increased my awareness of things like that. So I don't know of anybody in Spain with consumer debt because they're expected to live within their means. And they're not playing a rigged system where they can't live within their means. Um, the things that should be taxes are taxes. And what I mean by should is we pay for healthcare, we pay for education, we pay for retirement out of our own private funding, and we don't consider that a tax rate. And then we waltz around the world saying, the US has such a low tax rate. Look at our low tax rate. Well, you're not folding in the stuff that's expensive. So to that effect, I had a bronze healthcare plan for $550 a month here in the US. I am saving that money per month by living in Spain because for private healthcare, it was $900 a year, and they cover absolutely everything. There's no copays, there's no deductibles, there's none of that stuff. So that $550 that I'm saving is more than 3/4 of the rent that I pay in Spain. Just by not being in this country, I have $550 to work with, all right?
Per month.
Per month. And in the US, groceries and going out to eat once or twice a week, for me in Buffalo, it's pretty high here. It's around $1,000 a month per person, right? My groceries in Spain are $105 a month.
What?
$105 a month. And that I buy the same sorts of stuff, right? So I don't like eat a lot at home, especially in Spain because it's so cheap to eat out. But what I do eat at home is breakfast foods. Well, that's what I tend to buy most of here in the US. I buy more lunch and dinner foods in the US just because going out is so much more expensive, right? But yeah, it's $105 a month. When I go to the grocery store every week, I'm spending roughly 35 euros. It's crazy. And the food's fresh and it's great. And I can buy meat, fish. I mean, I go down to the fishmonger and I'll get an entire side of a dogfish and it's five euros for like, it's insane.
Well, you're blowing my mind with this. Especially, so like, I mean, suddenly I want to move to Spain. I actually don't want to move. I have to move my entire community to Spain for it to work for me. But wait, where do you live in Spain?
Yes.
Where?
I'm a nomad.
Oh,
So
you're
I don't have a permanent place. So currently my housing is my biggest expense. The most I've paid, I give myself a budget of about $1,200, and the most I pay is when I stay at an Airbnb. But the real travel hack or life hack is Spanish rent is really cheap. And so if you can be in a place for a month, you can spend between $300 and $700 for one person very easily. So my apartment in Granada was $700. I'm looking at a place like sort of a room for rent in like a quad sort of situation. I'm not sure in Oviedo, and it's $300 a month. It's just crazy. So, and even an Airbnb, I could be at a place for 2 to 4 weeks, and it still might only be $500 if I'm sharing it with a family there, which I actually prefer because then I have someone to talk to because I live by myself and I'm a rampant extrovert. So they're able to tell me where to go and what's good and, blah, blah, blah.
Well, if you ever go to Alicante, I don't know if you heard the episode I did with Paul and Kim, but my first, yeah, they're in Alicante. I'm sure they would totally.
My friend lives in Torrevieja, and that's an hour south by bus, and that's where I was in December.
Okay, well,
for Christmas and New Year's.
I want to connect you with Paul and Kim, and you guys can have a financial freedom party without me.
Word.
Wait, so something else you said really struck me, which is like, we may have lower taxes in the US, but the most expensive things that we have, housing, healthcare, education, we privatized.
We privatized them, and then we say that it's not, a tax, but that's only a technicality.
You're blowing my mind because, I mean, I don't know if this is obvious to you or the audience, but those are the things that have way outpaced inflation in the last 20, 30 years. Education has gone up. Like, I remember my tuition when I entered UC Davis in 1990 was $1,500 a year.
Oh,
So
wow.
$1,500 a year was my tuition. And now it is, I think UC Davis in state is 15,000 per year. So it's gone up 10x in the last 30 years,
Yep,
right? Housing, similar, right?
absolutely.
Healthcare, similar. So all the things that you talk about as like the things that we privatize in the US have become disproportionately more expensive in the last 30 years.
And I think that's part of the I think that's part of the problem that we have with our perspective of a lot of times we think that Europe is really expensive. And it's because when we travel to a place, you're staying in a hotel. I'm going to pay as much in a hotel to be in Prague for 8 days as I am to be in Spain for a whole month. Hotels are expensive, and if you were to live in hotels in the United States, you would be paying through the nose too, right? And so you can't let that affect your perspective. And there's a couple of things that I have about my dream of moving to Europe that I made mistakes in. And the first mistake that I made was thinking that I had to be a citizen to move to a place. You don't have to be a citizen. All you have to do is be a resident. And you don't have to be a permanent resident. You just need to find a way to get a visa to be in the place. Um, and once you're there, the cost of living is so much lower because they've socialized these things. And that's fairly true of most of Europe. From the people that I've talked to, France and Netherlands, and of course the Nordic countries are the fairly expensive ones, but they still have controls on these healthcare things, and everyone is fairly well to do. There's actually a middle class there that just doesn't exist here. And the economic suffering that I see from the economic colonialism that the Western Hemisphere is a part of, like, has become blatant and very clear to me. I mean, the U.S. was started as a slave colony, right? I mean that was the whole point, was to extract resources and extract labor out of the people that lived here. That's what we've fought a couple of wars over, and things like that. Well, that DNA, just like Facebook being like a weird place that for whatever reason ends up in arguments, right? There's like a DNA to the entity, and the US is still kind of a slave colony, and we've kind of changed some of the pieces on there, but it's it's still ultimately that. It's still an extractive place for the rich colonial powers to exploit people. And and the former colonialists have been enjoying the riches that they extracted and kind of let it ride, right? They invested in society, and again, everyone's benefiting, right? The sovereign wealth fund in Norway is a perfect example of everyone's benefiting, right, from what they've been doing. Even though that's extractive of resources and things like that, everyone's sharing in it. Um, that's what I see when I'm in Germany or in Spain, and I don't see that in England. It's very interesting. Um, England still has this classist sort of bent to it, and I see a lot more homelessness in England than I do anywhere else.
It's interesting because you're also talking about the places that have the most consumer debt too, right? The US has some absurd number. I just looked it up right now, $17 trillion of household debt. And over half of it is credit card debt.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I don't actually use the term because the word slavery is like super loaded, but
Oh, it absolutely is.
for years they talked about debt as a form of slavery.
Yes. Well, an indentured servitude was a way to get people into slavery in our history as well, right? Like, despite, like, other than stealing people from their homes and being sold off, which is like horrendous, there were lots of people that came over here who were poor, who were then tricked by debt as an instrument into indentured servitude. And a lot of what I see of Americans is I see a flavor of that. We're on our own and we own our own houses and blah blah blah, but who really owns their own house other than you?
Right. The bank owns the house, right? You're just paying
The bank owns the house. The bank tells you that you have to put insurance on the house. The bank tells you what you can and can't do. And unless you own your own thing, you can't do it. And the whole structure of everything is made to enforce that debt instrument as the extraction from the poor to the rich, as you had mentioned, right? And that interest rate itself is the rate, and that's really important to kind of tie this to what we're talking about with debt snowballs and things like that. I'd like to share my analogy with paddling upstream. So at the time I took your course, I was part of a competitive dragon boat team, and a dragon boat is a 20-person canoe, right? And so there's 10 benches, and we paddle competitively. And every week I would practice, and we would go from the Hawthorne Bridge to Ross Island, and we go upstream. And that distance, it took us about 40 minutes to paddle upstream because we're going against the current. And you would think that being on top of the river, that current wouldn't really matter as much as wind or things like that. But it turns out it consistently does. So it would take us 40 minutes to go upstream, and then we turned the boat around, and it took us 10 minutes to get downstream. And the level of that current is your interest rate. So if you are paying off debt, you are going against stream. And the whole point of this is to flip that around. The trouble that I've had with what we're talking about is, okay, well, now that I've turned the boat around and I'm gaining interest, who is paying me? Like, that's the trouble that I'm sort of morally having with this at this point. Now I'm the one profiting off of poor people in this system, and I don't know how to rectify that. That's a moral thing that I'm trying to grapple with.
Yeah,
but it's a question that I've had.
No, that really hits me because if Sterling Roth is right that debt is poor people paying rich people, and I'm on the rich side, that means a poor person's paying me.
Correct. So how do we fix that?
Oof.
Yep. Oof. So we may have bigger conversations to have later, Douglas, because I know you're a dreamer and I know you think about these things.
Well, maybe the first answer is you got to tax me more.
Absolutely. I mean, for sure. And that is something that the Spanish are not.
They're not afraid of.
They're not afraid of. So it's a graduated tax rate. Anything over 60K, I know, comes out at 45%. But if you're making 60K and your living expenses are 2,000 to 2,400 euros a month, well, I mean, like, who cares? Like,
You're good.
You're good. You're fine. And that tax rate, again, it pays for education. It pays for public transit. It pays for a lot of things. It pays for your retirement. And it pays for your health care. So that private healthcare that I have, I don't technically need. I just needed it to be able to get into the country before I started paying taxes.
So the one thing I've heard about Spain, I don't know if this is completely off the rails to our conversation or it actually applies. One thing I heard about Spain is employment or unemployment for young people is super high. It's like 25-30%. Is that connected to the taxes?
I'm not sure if that connects with taxes very much for me. I'm I'm wondering if the means by which they calculate that is different. I don't see a lot of unemployed people. There's not a bunch of people just hanging out. Um, and so,
Well, I think part of it is people who still live with their families. They're not like it's not the unemployed here in America where we just leave them destitute.
true, true. Yeah, and I'm on a visa where they protect those jobs, right? I'm not allowed to work in Spain. That's that's their ploy and their tactic is to get people like me who can work outside of Spain and not take a job but pay into their system, and kind of a win-win as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, I've heard these figures. Um, I just don't know how to reconcile it with what I see. Yeah, because I don't see really any poor people. I don't see a lot of homelessness. I see a little bit in the bigger cities. So in Madrid and Barcelona, I see more homelessness. But I don't I don't know that there's more than two or three people that I've seen in Granada that were homeless or looked homeless. Uh, the ones hanging out on benches asking for change, right, is my indicator of what homeless is, but it might not be the case. European societies just feel more robust to me, and there's definitely more of a middle class. And I don't know how to reconcile that 20 to 25% figure. I know I had a friend from Italy who lives in Barcelona, and yeah, she lived with her parents for like 13 years after high school or after university, I'm forgetting which, because could not find a job. And it's really bad in Italy too. So yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Well, to you know, as you end this section, which is an advertisement from the Bureau of Turismo of España,
España, España.
um, it occurs to me, again, we worked together 10 years ago, and you've gone off and done all these things. It just occurs to me, like, so many people, including myself, but especially, people who are still working, their sense of possibility is limited by what's in front of them. And somehow, and I think financial freedom, the course, helped you with this. You were able to break the boundaries of your status quo and do all this stuff.
Yeah, that's true. And I will say that once I got out of debt, then okay, so speaking of the snowball, right? Well, now I have $2,500 a month that I was paying in debt. So where's that money going now, right? That money goes into a savings account. That money goes into my retirement account. That money stays in my checking account as a float so that I can automate my expenses and not have to think about it. Because so my goal for myself is to keep $10,000 in my checking account because that feels good to me. It's an emotional thing, right? My next goal is to have about 10 months of expenses in my checking account, right? And so, that's about 22,000, right? But I'm still also paying for my retirement, my capitalistic shitty retirement that's investing in markets and extracting wealth from poor people. So again, psychologically, when you have this padding, and I'll give you a great example of how it really worked for me. It's really, really freeing. It feels freeing when you don't have to check your account to make sure that you can like buy a night out, right? And also, so I'm not great on budgeting. I think that would be a great sort of thing to bring up. When I was in the classes and in 2019 and in 2020, I was really trying to stick to a budget, but it went from head to gut to me where I just sort of understood what I could spend. And many of my expenses I've actually run through QuickBooks because they're kind of related to my business. And so that's kind of how I track those things. But I've tried YNAB. YNAB doesn't make any sense to me. I keep trying. But I found that I was categorizing stuff in YNAB and I was categorizing stuff in QuickBooks and or like what was QuickBooks thing? Mint. Mint was a thing for a while. But I found that all of that was super redundant. And so.
Yeah, I just use my credit card to categorize my spending because I have the categories. But if you ever want to try YNAB again, listen to the YNAB episode, and I can connect you to Whitney, who will give you a tutorial on YNAB. But okay, I mean, it occurs to me like you're talking about $2,500 a month that used to go to debt is now yours. Like, even if you didn't invest, you're growing downstream now compared to what you were.
Absolutely going downstream. When I look at my combined bank balances, I'm floored. And I want to give you my example. So last year, I did taxes, and my accountant gave me. He's like, Cedric, I got some bad news for you. You owe $16,000 in taxes. There weren't enough deductions for you to avoid this. And so I looked at my accounts and I just took some from what I was saving for this and some from what I was saving for that, and I just wrote a check and it was done. And now I have more than 16,000 saved, and everything I'm getting the rich person discount, okay, as well. No, there's a rich person discount that you all have to know about, right? Because if you pay for things in installments, they're charging you for that, right? So I pay car insurance, I get the rich person discount. The healthcare, I pay annual. I pay both of these annually, and I get like a $300 discount.
Oh yeah, it's like paying your my Portland mortgage. If I just pay it all up front,
yeah,
pay several $100s less than if I paid it in installments.
Same with your taxes, right? Yeah.
How close are you to financial freedom? Like where your passive income meets your expenses?
There are some pending things, but I have my stepfather died in 2019, and so I'm in the process of selling his house. Depending on how much I get for that house, I will probably be able to pay off between 70 and 90% of what's left in Portland. So a year, 2 years. And if it weren't a year or 2 years, I would say it's closer to 4 or 5. Like that I can. I'm 47.
Holy moly! I mean,
I'm not far behind you, Doug. I'm not, and it's because of what you taught me that informed these decisions that I made, and then enabled me to tap into my inspiration and my dreams, which it's really strange to me, like these dreams that I had to own a bar, to live in Spain. I've been wanting to live in Spain since 2012.
It's funny because I remember when in module 3 when you wrote about your financial future, when you wrote about owning a bar and moving to Spain, and you manifested it. That's just amazing.
Yeah. And I don't really think of manifestation very often, but this, I directed my efforts and I directed my energies in this way, and it happened.
Yeah, you direct. I mean, that's the whole thing about financial freedom. It's never people talk about it's like it's about money. It's never about the money. It's about your dreams.
Yeah. So may need your help in some other aspects. We'll talk later.
Well, Cedric, anything else you want to tell the audience, either about paying off debt or financial freedom or taking the course, whatever? Anything else for the audience?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think taking the course is important. One of the things I really got out of it was my money scripts. I had a real fear of holding on to money because in the past and when I was younger, if I ever had $1,000 in my bank account, there would be some unfortunate event that would drain it.
I remember this. Yeah.
And so I just kind of spent all that I had. So because I was like, fuck it, it's gonna get drained anyway. And so learning that I was averse, and I still have some moral issues as we've discussed, but unlocking that, sitting with it, and trying to unlearn it really helped. Being willing to move is a big thing as well. Not many are and not many can, and I understand that. But yeah, really learning money scripts was very important to me, and the class unlocked that, and then unlocked community. I still get together with my cohort. We talk every 3 to 4 weeks. Still,
I
like,
know.
and we were supporting each other through the pandemic. People have moved all over the world. I mean, I've moved the furthest, I think, but and time zones are hard now because of it. But yeah, like, having that community of people to sort of keep you honest, and to be able to really talk about a taboo subject such as money with is helpful. I mean, I do want to bring that up, that especially in our culture, and I think it's informed from the English. We're not supposed to talk about money. We're not supposed to talk about figures, about how much you make. It's sort of like this embarrassing way to keep us all swept under the rug and not knowing what each other makes. And if we don't know what one another makes, that allows the people that employ us to screw us over and to pay us less than what we're worth. And that is a difficulty that I think we all have. We've been browbeaten into believing that we're not allowed to share our salary with people. And it's like, but who gets the benefit from that, and who suffers, right? Like, why are we following that directive? And that's something that I've always struggled with, because I'm a very open and transparent person, and I worry about coming off as bragging or whatever when I say what I make. But I was generally, for most of my life, barely scraping by, and this was the turnaround for me. It was.
That's beautiful. It's funny because I look back, we've known each other for 10 years. You have been open when you were struggling, and you were open when you're doing well.
Yeah. And I'm thankful, I'm thankful that we met. Thankful that, you bought eggs for my chicken, and you were my only customer.
No, Yeah, that's not true.
You're my only consistent customer.
We're going to end this soon, but one thing that this here's an idea that I'll give you. One of the things I've been thinking about for myself is, where do our money scripts end and where do our own morals start? Like, I know my frugality script and my belief in like climate change and non-consumption is so tied up to my money vigilance of being an immigrant. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, like what we think are morals, are they just our scripts, internal scripts? I don't know.
I do think they're related. I think a lot of these things are scripts. I think belief is a script. I think um, our self-image is often a script, and a lot of these things are informed by culture at large. Some are informed by your experiences. Um, but I can tell you, when you move to another country, it really challenges some of those beliefs, some of those scripts, because they're markedly absent. I mean, one of my favorite things about living in Spain, and perhaps it's because I'm not entirely fluent, or perhaps it's something else, but not everything is run through a lens of politics. Politics is not an everyday part of everyone's life, and people aren't arguing with each other about politics there. They're too busy enjoying wine for $2 a glass that comes with a piece of ham. Like, and it's just their priorities are different. And I do feel like we have definitely been overly politicized in the US, and I think it's a big distraction from what keeps us at bay and from asking for what it is that we deserve for the labor and efforts that we have.
I think we're just going to end on that. Thank you, Cedric.
No problem, mate. Thank you for this. I mean, it really was a life-changing event, especially when I start to look back at it in the impacts that it has had. So thanks for the key, man. Thanks for letting me paddle downstream.
Well, thanks to Cedric for coming on to our podcast. This is Douglas Soy, and you've been listening to the School of Financial Freedom podcast. Stay tuned for another episode. Good to have you all here. Thank you for tuning in to the School of Financial Freedom podcast, where we ask, what does it mean to live a meaningful inner and outer life? And how do our personal finances fit into that? We hope you enjoyed this episode and it helps you live with an increasing sense of empowerment, integrity, and agency in the world. For more information, resources, and to re-listen to this or any past episodes, visit our website at schoolofinancialfreedom.com. There you can find out when the next cohort of Financial Freedom 1, the online course, is. If you've enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a review, as it helps more people find us and join our community of people interested in the intersection of money and personal and spiritual growth. I'm Douglas Soy, founder of the School of Financial Freedom. You can also find me on Substack, where you can subscribe to my popular newsletter, Money and Meaning. I also love hearing from readers and listeners, so write me at www.douglassoy.com. I'm grateful that you listened, and I hope that this episode has given you hope and insight into taking control of your finances to live the life you want.